Campaign controversies. Leaked emails show tension inside Hillary Clinton's inner circle as Donald Trump deals with Republican backlash. Hurricane Matthew's deadly consequences. The number of U.S. victims continues to rise. War wounded. Emotional images of a young girl injured in Syria's civil war and Russia's ties to that bloody conflict. And a guide for voters. The president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops helps us vote our conscience. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 11th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Newly leaked emails show how private statements by Hillary Clinton clash with what she said on the campaign trail. They also revealed deep-seated prejudices against Catholics among Clinton insiders. Jason Calvi has the story from the White House tonight. Jason?
Brian, the new revelations are found in hacked campaign emails shared with WikiLeaks. We get a sampling there of some of Clinton's paid speeches to Wall Street firms as well as other groups. And we also see Clinton campaign insiders talking about policy, Planned Parenthood, and even bashing Catholics.
Last week, WikiLeaks began posting what the organization says are years of emails from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. In one, a left-leaning scholar writes, "Many of the most powerful elements of the conservative movement are all Catholic, many converts." It then mentions Rupert Murdoch and a Wall Street Journal editor saying they must be attracted to the systematic thought and severely backwards gender relations. In another, a Hillary supporter urges the Clinton campaign to speak out aggressively against the Little Sisters of the Poor case, level a political nuclear blast ASAP against the Supreme Court decision that could come in June that would end the contraceptive mandate in Obamacare. Investigative reporter Sarah Westwood, who's been combing through the emails, says she sees a pattern.
The public Hillary said she did not support fracking. The private Hillary said she did support fracking. The public Hillary came out against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She said she wanted trade deals that benefited American workers. The private Hillary said she wanted open trade and open borders. Now, all of the progressives that were skeptical of her positions in the first place have just had their fears confirmed by these emails.
In Sunday's debate, Clinton defended her comment that politicians often have a public and a private position on an issue.
As I recall, that was something I said about Abraham Lincoln after having seen the wonderful Steven Spielberg movie called Lincoln.
And Trump, who's dealing with his own scandal, isn't backing down.
Just trust me, it's real bad stuff.
Clinton campaign chair John Podesta did admit that his emails were hacked, but he raised questions that possibly some of the emails were manipulated or edited. U.S. intelligence officials have said that Russia is blamed in some other leaks and some other hacking involving this 2016 campaign. Brian?
Jason, how are Catholic groups responding to those harsh anti-Catholic emails?
Well, the Catholic League's Bill Donahue says that Clinton is not responsible for what was said, but they say she's now responsible to sanction those Clinton campaign insiders. Donald Trump's Catholic advisory group says that what happened, what was revealed in those emails involving Catholics, returns us to the dark ages of American history when there were signs up, for example, in New York that said Catholics need not apply.
Jason Calvi at the White House, thank you. Donald Trump criticizes Republicans for withdrawing their support or refusing to defend him, including House Speaker Paul Ryan. He tweets today, "The shackles have been taken off me, and I can now fight for America the way I want to." Other Republicans stand by Trump, including Representative Steve King, who says voting for Hillary Clinton is not an option.
And I look at the two candidates, which one will move the agenda in the right direction, which one will move the agenda in the completely wrong direction. That's our choice. We only get to vote yes. And I'm hearing from some of my Republican colleagues and some of the leadership that they aren't really telling me how they're going to vote. They just say they're not going to any longer actively support and campaign for Donald Trump. I think that's a mistake. I think that drags the entire ticket down.
This is the last day of voter registration in a dozen states. Early voting begins in Ohio tomorrow and soon in other states. On the campaign trail, Hillary Clinton shares a stage with Al Gore in Miami. The former vice president reminded voters about how close elections can be. You'll recall that Gore lost Florida and the 2000 election by a narrow margin to George W. Bush. This is Gore's first campaign appearance on behalf of Democrat Hillary Clinton. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Hurricane Matthew continues to affect the U.S. even though the storm itself has moved away. North Carolina reports 4 more fatalities, bringing the death toll in the U.S. to 30. 3 people died in cars washed away by floodwaters. A man was killed when his car was hit by a tree. North Carolina's governor also reports a deadly police action shooting. He says deputies shot and killed an armed man who confronted them while they were on a search and rescue mission.
It did occur in very unique circumstances in which there was actually high water, and our first responders were coming through with a Humvee trying to help and rescue people. And all we know is there was a confrontation and a shooting that has resulted in a man's death.
The most widespread damage and death from Hurricane Matthew was in Haiti, where hundreds of people have died. Russia sends mixed messages to the U.S. and its allies after another round of airstrikes in Syria. President Vladimir Putin is calling off talks with France, but other high-ranking Russians say they want to work with the West. Wyatt Goolsby reports.
Brian, Russia isn't letting up in its air attacks against Syrian rebels. They want to make sure the Syrian government takes back several key cities like Aleppo, but humanitarian groups are begging for the bombings to stop so they can provide help to innocent civilians.
Syrian activists say this little girl somehow survived a building collapse when her town was hit by air and mortar attacks. She was pulled from the rubble and reunited with her father, but the violence reaches far beyond her home. Airstrikes on rebel-held parts of the besieged city of Aleppo killed at least 16 people. The Russians are supporting the Syrian government, who are trying to take back the city by force. Russia's defense ministry says it wants to work with Western countries to negotiate a peace settlement in Syria. But Russia's President, Vladimir Putin, is calling off a visit to France after the French president accuses Russia of war crimes.
I haven't seen a single case in Syria where the regime or the Russian military, after bombing civilian targets deliberately, indiscriminately, said, yeah, we're going to look into that. Not once.
The U.S. State Department has been especially critical of Russia. Last week, John Kerry called off all U.S. negotiations with Russia on Syria. Former U.S. Ambassador Kenneth Yalowitz has spent extensive time in Moscow and in former Soviet countries.
Putin uses anti-Westernism in an instrumental way, for internal power and internal, popularity, and he takes advantages of various weaknesses and opportunities.
Yalowitz calls Putin a tactician who's not afraid to pit countries against each other.
Yeah, I understand President Obama very well, not wanting to put, boots on the ground, but I do think there are steps that we could take, perhaps arming opposition, but I do think we have to be a bit more forward-leaning there.
Russia and the U.S. brokered a ceasefire in Syria, but it collapsed after just a week. Yalowitz says Putin may project power, but he says the Russian government still has lots of problems, including internal corruption and a decline in its economy. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby, thank you. A Brazilian priest is found stabbed to death along a road near Rio de Janeiro. 37-year-old Father Francisco Carlos Barbosa Tenorio was the pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes Parish in the Rio region. His diocese issued a statement saying he was loved by the faithful and had no enemies. The statement concludes, everything leads us to believe that it was a robbery which ended in murder. Australia backs away from a plan to hold a public vote on redefining marriage. Labor Department leaders or Labor Party leaders say they're trying to avoid a divisive public debate. They argue it would be better if the issue was decided in Parliament. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is still pushing for a public referendum. A new Massachusetts law is challenged by the Christian law firm Alliance Defending Freedom. A suit was filed today on behalf of 4 Massachusetts churches. They claim the law forces them to open shower facilities and restrooms based on perceived gender identity. The lawsuit asks the courts to suspend enforcement of the law against the churches while that lawsuit proceeds. Well, every 4 years, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops releases guidelines helping Catholics cast their votes without casting aside church teaching. The latest edition was approved by the bishops last year. Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, joining us by Skype from Louisville. Your Excellency, thanks so much for taking time to be with us.
Brian, I'm so happy to be with all of you. Thanks for having me on.
Why would you say it's so important for Catholics to read this entire guide?
Well, of course, forming conscience for faithful citizenship is meant to do just what the title says, to form our consciences. And so it's so very important, I think, for a Catholic to pause and read the entire document, which of course talks about specific issues, but even more importantly, talks about the need for a Catholic to consider not just what's good for himself or herself, but rather what is good for the common good, and what does our ethics, our commitments require as we prepare to vote.
So while not telling us how to vote for a particular candidate or not, does it help us distinguish between the candidates and the parties on key issues?
Well, it certainly deals with specific hierarchy of issues, of the issues of life that are so very important. It will not get into actually comparing one candidate from another. That would be, of course, something that the voter is going to need to do. But this document, I think, sets the platform, if you will. It sets the stage for someone to form their consciences. And Brian, by the way, it's not an accident that we publish it always more than a year ahead of time, precisely because this is not meant to be a last-minute fix, but this is meant to help the voter as he or she votes on all levels, by the way, for our president, but also on all levels of voting this coming month.
And what one piece of advice would you give us in preparation for this election?
Well, I think the first thing that someone ought to do is prayerfully ask the Lord's judgment and ask the Lord's direction. And then look at the document that we have, especially the introductory note, in order to help shape understandings about what issues are most important within our country.
The President of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Most Reverend Joseph Kurtz, joining us from Louisville, where he's Archbishop. Excellency, thank you. We always appreciate your time. You're very gracious.
Thanks, Brian.
Coming up, lifting up young women, the First Lady and others recognize the International Day of the Girl and respect for life. A young Zika patient's family celebrates his first birthday. Pope Francis says Jesus asks us to perform good deeds with humility. He preached at this morning's Mass in the Santa Marta residence in the Vatican, where the Pope lives. He says the Lord wants us to reject religion concerned only with its outward appearance. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. First Lady Michelle Obama marks the International Day of the Girl with a special film. It's about girls overcoming incredible challenges to receive an education.
If anyone had told me that I would be the First Lady of the United States of America, I would have laughed at them. Because growing up in the United States, there had never been an African-American president, let alone an African-American First Lady.
The CNN film We Will Rise was screened at the White House today. It shows the First Lady speaking with girls in Liberia. According to the U.S. Agency for International Development, more than 62 million girls around the world are not in school. Well, Anna Halpine, founder of the World Youth Alliance, joins us by Skype from New York City. Anna, you promote the dignity of the human person there at the UN. Is the United Nations doing that for girls?
I think there's a lot of agreement at the UN about important things we need to do for girls. Improve their access to education, make sure their security is maintained, and invest in the dignity and the worth of every girl, making sure that that's recognized by cultures around the world.
But doesn't the UN push an agenda of abortion and contraception in developing countries?
It's true that this often gets debated when girls, and especially adolescent girls, are discussed. And this is one of the difficulties we face, is getting sidetracked in these types of ideological ideas that get promoted, rather than focusing on basic needs about which we can all agree. So this is certainly one of the major challenges that we face at the UN, is getting beyond these activities that promote social engineering in different ways and moving into areas where we can actually make lives better, particularly for girls.
How specifically might you improve the UN approach here?
I think a lot of humility and charity needs to come into the way many nations look at the UN. There's a real need for powerful countries to really understand that the UN has the capacity to affect lives for the good, rather than just become a place where they can push their agenda. That's really what needs to happen for girls to win. I think the political possibility is there, but the action that we need to see is still lacking. And World Youth Alliance tries to be a voice to at least put that onto the agenda and support countries when they're willing to move in that direction.
And what would you say are the main challenges facing girls in the world today?
A lot of the challenges are well known. We know that girls are often the first to suffer when infrastructure and corrupt government moves into place. We know that girls are often not given the opportunities that they need and deserve in education, and that as a result, communities and nations miss the entrepreneurship, the ideas, and the creativity that girls have to offer in building their communities and in making the world a better place. We also know that girls grow up to become mothers and women, and these are the key decision makers in how critical activities such as family well-being, ongoing education of girls are made. So investing in girls is investing in women, and we know that this has long-term capacity to change culture and to change the world. So it's an important area for all of us to commit to, and it's something that's really at the heart of understanding and promoting the dignity of every human person. And we are happy to stand up for girls, particularly the most vulnerable, including those who are not born, today on this International Day of the Girl Child.
And finally, if you would, just give us a snapshot of the World Youth Alliance and the work you do.
World Youth Alliance is a global coalition of young people committed to promoting the dignity of each human person. We do this in many ways through education, but also through policy. So we advocate for the most defenseless and the dignity of every person in places like the UN, where that voice often needs to be heard and is not so strongly present in the debates as we might hope.
Anna Halpine, founder and CEO of World Youth Alliance. Thanks for joining us by Skype from New York, Anna.
Thank you, Brian.
And while the Zika virus may lead to severe birth defects in children, a Brazilian family recognizes the value of their child's life. The family hosts a first birthday party for Jose Wesley Campos, born with Zika syndrome. He has mounting medical problems. Just 2 weeks ago, he was put on a feeding tube after swallowing problems left him dangerously underweight. His mom says Jose has taught her how to live and how to love. The Brazilian government reports more than 2,000 cases of microcephaly or other brain malformations in the last year. The health ministry believes they're almost all connected with the Zika virus. The University of Notre Dame will award its 2017 Evangelium Vitae Medal to the Jerome Lejeune Foundation. Lejeune established the first specialized clinic for Down syndrome patients near Paris. He was the first to link an intellectual disability to a genetic cause, discovering a genetic abnormality he named trisomy 21. Dr. Lejeune devoted his life to protecting unborn children with Down syndrome from the so-called therapeutic abortion. Up next, lasting legacy. St. John XXIII's great-nephew discusses the impact of Vatican II more than half a century after it convened. And a priceless movie, one man's real-life journey to save two sisters. Today, October 11th, is the memorial of St. John XXIII, serving as Pope from 1958 to 1963. He's best known for convening the Second Vatican Council. It brought bishops from around the world to discuss relations between the Catholic Church and modern society. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Our own producer Mary Shovlin spoke with St. John XXIII's great-nephew a few years ago. He says the council was his uncle's response to divine inspiration through the Holy Spirit.
Pope Francis spoke about this, pointing out that John XXIII let himself be led. He was led to do this. He didn't create the problems to be discussed at the council. Rather, he gave them a very strong answer.
His nephew says it was a decision that John XXIII describes as his own personal decision and for which he accepted full responsibility. Mary is joining us from Rome tonight, and refresh our memories. Why did John XXIII call the Second Vatican Council?
Brian, just in my conversations with Marco Roncalli, his great-nephew, we know that John XXIII wanted to bring the church into the modern era. He wanted to help its relationship with the modern world, and he wanted to open up a window in the Vatican and let the fresh air in. And we know we can see that in just some of the reformations since the Second Vatican Council. We see it in the liturgy, the Mass now being celebrated in the vernacular, which just means the language of the local populations. We see it in the Church's dialogue now with other religions, the Church really reaching out to talk with other religions. And even during the Second Vatican Council, the fact that he invited lay people, men and women religious, people who weren't cardinals and bishops, to take part in this. So really opening up the Church to the modern world was his goal, and I think that he certainly accomplished that.
So there were many councils before this one. What made this one different?
Well, you know, this one's called the Second Vatican Council, but this is actually the 21st Ecumenical Council, which these things are. So we have about one every 100 years in the Catholic Church. And up until this point, we've dealt with just establishing the creed. Who was Jesus Christ, for example, that he had two natures, human and divine. But this council had published 16 documents. And so it took on everything from the laity to missionary work, from the Eucharist and the liturgy and everything in between. So just the sheer range of topics sets it apart from any other council.
It took a lot of courage for St. John the 23rd to launch the council. Tell us a little bit about what he was like personally.
Well, you're getting this report from Rome, and of course we all know him here as the good Pope, as he is known throughout the world. But I often say he was one of the most modern popes we've had to date. Why is that? He was the first one to travel outside of Rome, first one to take a train out of the city. He was also the first one to visit hospitals here, and he went into prisons and celebrated Mass there with the prisoners. So very much a good predecessor for Pope Francis, and the people here on the ground still remember him as Il Papa Buono, the good Pope, even today.
And he had a great sense of humor. On St. John the 23rd, Mary Shovelin reporting from Rome tonight. Mary, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And Italy suspends Rome's bid for the 2024 Olympics. It was forced to pull the plug because of the staunch opposition of Rome's mayor. The city's withdrawal leaves only Los Angeles, Paris, and Budapest in the running. The International Olympic Committee will select the host city in September of 2017. The Holy Father travels to Sweden later this month for the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. It's a gesture of goodwill and a significant step toward furthering dialogue. A Lutheran leader says the influx of refugees in Sweden is causing a spiritual awakening.
We have a lot of newcomers into our society, coming from other countries. Refugees, asylum seekers from Syria, for example, who have a strong Christian tradition. And because of their situation, and they are all over, people say to themselves, but who am I? What are my Christian roots? So I would say we have a revival coming.
In 2015, Sweden granted more than 32,000 requests to migrants for asylum. A new movie being released Friday targets faith-based audiences. Priceless follows a man who saves two sisters from human trafficking, an issue Pope Francis frequently addresses.
Did I fail them?
Vessel! There's no lock, huh?
Did I do what needed to be done?
Hey, the girls, where are you taking?
It's not your problem. Happy trails.
Priceless tells the story of James Stevens, whose life spirals out of control after his wife dies. He agrees to drive a truck cross-country, not knowing two women are locked in the back. The film delves into the dark sex trade and the efforts of one man to help its victims.
We just encourage you and implore you to partner with us in this message and taking these great themes of hope and pointing people towards heaven and really celebrating God-given relationships.
To learn more about the film and see the trailer, you can visit pricelessmovement.com. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night. God bless.